Hey, this is Ron Coddington. I'm here in Arlington National Cemetery, and we'll wait just a moment for folks to start coming on. It's 3 o'clock. Just heard the bells chime 3 over in that direction. I am on the far end of the cemetery. As you know, it's a big cemetery. And on the far end here, about a good half an hour walk from the visitor center, and there are a number of folks here today, some fairly large crowds, and most of them are up towards the visitor center and over in the newer sections of the cemetery. I'm back here in section 13. For those of you who know the cemetery, section 13 is the Civil War, largely Civil War section. I'm surrounded by grave markers from all the states, and it's always a beautiful moment to be quiet. Occasionally we've got jets, helicopters, the noise in the distance. I'm joined today by cicadas. You can hear the sound of them, and a few have landed on me and chortled a little bit and then went on their merry way. 17 years in the ground, and they're out doing their thing on Memorial Day. So big thanks to all of you coming on right now. Tom, Trey, Sean, Robert, Keith, thanks a lot for tuning in. Should also say, for those of you who are on Facebook today, if you're over on the Gettysburg Publishing page, you saw an announcement that I'm joining Team Gettysburg Publishers on a book. More information to come on that book. And I'm super excited about the opportunity to work with Kevin Drake and all the fine folks at Gettysburg Publishing. So stay tuned. We'll have information coming up in the very near future. So, but while we're here today at Arlington National Cemetery, if there's one day in the year of a nation in America that you want to be in a cemetery, this is that day, Memorial Day. Not a surprise that you're going to be in a cemetery on Memorial Day. Not a surprise that cemeteries even exist. You know, if you go back millennium, the idea of honoring the dead, the idea of remembering family, friends, loved ones, that idea of memory and of preservation, of knowing who we are, where we came from, and leaving something behind is part of humanity. It's baked into who we are. You know, if you go back to the 19th century, cities were beginning to get more and more populated, and those local cemeteries began to get awfully crowded. And in the late 1830s, there was a movement to start getting some of those urban cemeteries that are filling up to establish new locations. And in America, you have the rural cemetery movement. And as part of that, you've got these sprawling, spacious garden-like cemeteries. Certainly, Arlington fits the bill of being one of those cemeteries. As many of you know, we're just it's a couple miles from Washington, D.C. and all the sites of the nation's capital. Here, it's so peaceful and it's so quiet. And so just taking in all that is wonderful. And I think that's part of that, the idea of that rural cemetery movement of the 1830s is very much alive in today. And Another thing that I think about when I'm here is Victorian traditions going back to the 19th century. You imagine the birth of rural cemeteries, thinking of cemeteries as destinations, and you tie that in. You can't help but think that there's a coincidence. Oh, I have a cicada friend that's jumped into the scene. Hello, Mr. Cicada. All right. No surprise that the cemeteries are taking hold here in the midst of the Victorian traditions around mourning and around death. So it's easy to imagine a family trip, a funeral to a rural cemetery, to some place that's out beyond the confines of a city or a town. Not to say that the town cemeteries aren't as important. They are. But certainly in Victorian times, in the 19th century, you see a lot of that changing. When you then think about that in context of the Civil War, and you think about the enormity of the dead, and those latest figures of 750,000 dead, and the many, many, many who suffered life-changing injuries, who remain behind, it's hard to get your head around. One way that I like to think about it is, if you put the population of the Civil War America into today's population, you're basically multiplying it by tenfold. So the death toll from 1861 to 1865 of 750,000 would be equal to 7.5 million today. That's almost impossible to think about that. But in a way, it gives you an opportunity to think about how important these rituals around death are. And in that context, it's easy to think about, it's easy to understand how a place like Arlington National Cemetery could come to exist. It's easy to understand how Decoration Day could come to exist. I like the idea that Decoration Day came to be. There's so many different number of explanations about how it came to be. The popular explanation is John Logan, Civil War veterans, 1869, making it official. But even before that, this idea of decorating the graves, this is something that was part of who we were. It's part of humanity. It's certainly part of America, part of that rural cemetery movement, part of those Victorian death traditions. So here we are in the years, the decades, the century, more than a century past since that event, and people like me and you keep coming to cemeteries on Decoration Day, now Memorial Day, to think about those individuals who made a sacrifice to preserve the Constitution, to preserve the Union, to preserve freedom, to preserve the idea of what this country is all about, to preserve that great experiment for other generations, for our generation to carry on. So I'm here today for all of those reasons. And I'm also here because of a photograph. I'm here because of this photograph. I'm here at this spot because of this photograph. Give you a look. This is how I came to first meet or see this portrait and get to know James Downey of the 2nd Ohio Cavalry. It was at the DC photo show in early 2020, right before the pandemic. And Paul Bucher came by my table, Military Images was set up, and he had this photograph in his hands and asked me if I'd scan it for the new owner, who is Jim Quinlan. Jim is the principal of the Arlington National Cemetery project, which seeks to identify, get the records and photographs for 15,000 plus Civil War veterans that are buried all around me here. And so Jim, doing some amazing work, continues to do amazing work. Anyway, this image is now owned by Jim, and I scanned it. For those of you who know me at the shows, I'm the guy with the scanner, does a lot of scanning. I happily scanned James's photo for a future column in Military Images magazine, which we promptly did publish. So, but we're on the spot because this photograph, this relic, this little bit of a time capsule led us here. And so James Downey he's buried right behind me. You can see his grave marker with an American flag, decorated with an American flag. And this photo is, among the neat things about it, is James is wearing a red uniform. It's a red uniform. My best guess is that he was a volunteer fireman. It's pure speculation, but it certainly has that feel to it. And on the inset of the frame is a period pen inscription. I'll read it to you because it says a lot in an economic space. James Downey, born in Ohio in 1843, died in 1865. A soldier in the War of '61, wounded in the last battle fought, died in Washington, and is buried in the Arlington Cemetery, Washington. Now, in all the research that I've done, I've certainly done my share of research of veterans buried here. It's uncommon when I've come across a soldier who was buried while the war was still in progress. His death date is April 26th of 1865. And as I mentioned earlier, he served in the 2nd Ohio Cavalry. And the Cleveland newspaper had something to say, wrote with pride about its boys in the 2nd Cavalry, the daily leader of Cleveland. I love this quote because they talk about the regiment through the perspective of its horses. I love this. The second, so the daily leader says, has served in 12 states and a territory, has marched 2,200 miles, and watered its horses. I love this part. Watered its horses in the Ohio, the Mississippi, the Osage, the Kansas, the Arkansas, the Cumberland, the Antietam, the Shenandoah, Bull Run, the Rapidan, the Rappahannock, the Anna, the York, the Chickahominy, the James, the Appomattox, the Nottoway, and the Roanoke. It's the unusual description of a regiment's service. Maybe not uncommon, but certainly unusual from my research. James Downey enlisted in November of 1861. He was 18. And he served through all of this. Watered his horses in all of these rivers, all of these dozen states, territory. He was there for all of it. On April 1st, 1865. Of course, he didn't know this, but the war was 8 days away from Appomattox Courthouse before Grant and Lee had that historic meeting at the McLean House. Less than 2 weeks before his commander-in-chief was assassinated. James Downey, as one soldier tells the story, he and his comrades got up that morning at Five Forks down there near Appomattox in Virginia, and they didn't have breakfast, didn't have time for breakfast. They were called into action, went into action, trying to fight a delaying action, really, for the 5th Corps, the infantry of the 5th Corps to come up. You have to remember, this is not like the early war battles where guys are lining up and folks are carefully positioning. This is a fast-moving war. This is the war that I think we really don't think about quite so much. You've got Robert E. Lee is on the run. Grant is on the run chasing him. And Every moment counts at this point. The war is coming fast to conclusion. Everybody knows. They don't know when, but they know that it's soon going to end. And here we are on April 1st at Five Forks. You got a bunch of Ohio Buckeye cavalrymen who are filling in. They're on foot. They're not on their horses now. They're on foot, and they're fighting in action so that those 5th Corps infantrymen can come up and can help push back these Confederates. So, as the story goes, they didn't get their breakfast. They go into the fight. Confederates are coming on. They fight. They go into one charge. They get repulsed. Another charge. They get pushed back. And about this time, the 5th Corps comes up and plugs the gap. You know the rest of the story. As I mentioned, a few days later, you've got the surrender happening. 35 of those Ohio cavalrymen were on the casualty list. James Downey is one of them. So he's carried to Washington, one of the hospitals. Washington is many things to many people during the war. It's a political capital, military capital. It's a military camp. It's also a complex of hospitals. And James makes his way to one of those hospitals. He's carried to one of those hospitals. He doesn't make it. He lingers. Finally, he dies. It's April 26th of 1865 down in North Carolina. Sherman is bringing another Confederate army to bay while all this is going on. And here in Arlington, the remains of James Downey, right here, are being laid to rest. And so we remember James today. We remember the Civil War. We remember 750,000 dead, 7.5 million in today's numbers. We remember Americans who served in all branches of the military, and we think about them today. We honor them, those who were killed in battle. This is the day for them. We remember them. We also remember their families and their friends who knew all of these men, and the generations of us that have come after. Some of them with a photograph of someone we never met, someone who's not even related, to say thank you for your service. And as we look around, and as I look around and I think about all of these stones, I'm going to just give you a quick look here. As we take a look at all of these markers, it does leave me with a strong feeling that the work that they did is still unfinished, and it's up to us to do our part to make sure that what they fought for lives on. So I'm going to walk over to another grave marker and photograph it for the next issue of Military Images, for our regular feature called Hallowed Ground. I'm going to be thinking about James today, be thinking about reflecting on his photograph, reflecting on his service, and I hope you do too, or I hope you think of someone that you know, someone you don't know. So today's their day, and I do thank you for tuning in. Thank you for those of you for your support for Military Images, and all you in the photo collecting community, all of you with an interest in photographic history, social history, military history, American history. I appreciate that. Thanks for the support. Take care. Bye.